Hey, you got a minute? Or should I say, a few minutes? I'm going to tell you a story today about Elisha and two she-bears. What did they do? And what happened? But first, I want to tell you something that I found out. I looked it up, and according to World Animal Foundation, globally, now this is what the internet says, the average number of annual bear attacks on humans is 39.6, which if you cut it for America and Europe, it's 11.4 and 18.2 annually. So I don't know if that's true. I watch things on the internet and I think, wow, those bears look scary. And sometimes they attack people and they have killed people, but supposedly they don't kill very much. Probably Sasquatch does more. Anyway, I want to tell you a really strange story first. This story is called The Red Wristband. It was a doctor at a hospital, and the patients at this hospital were tagged with colored bands. Now, if you had a green band, it meant you're alive. You can wander around and breathe. But if you were dead, you had a red tag. So one night, this doctor needed some supplies, and they had to go all the way to the basement, several-storied hospital. So he goes to the elevator, and the doors were open already, and there was a lady inside. She was just standing there, had a gown on, so he figured she must be a patient. And the patients were able, this hospital would let them roam the hospital, stretch your legs and so on, so they could go some places in the hospital, but they had to be back by 10 o'clock. So what happened was, as he steps into the elevator, he pushes the number for the basement. The lady didn't do anything. She didn't say which floor she wanted. Nothing was indicated on where the buttons were on the elevator, so he didn't know where she was going, but he figured, well, maybe she's going where I'm going, the hospital basement for whatever reason. So the elevator reaches the floor and the door opens. But something really strange happened. He saw somebody limping really fast towards the elevator. He had a gown on, and it scared the doctor, so he punched the button as fast as he could to close the doors. His heart was pounding, and the lady in the elevator with him said, "What'd you do that for?" He just was going to use the elevator. And the doctor said with his heart racing, "Did you see his wrist?" The doctor said it was red. "He died last night, and I would know because I did his surgery." The woman then lifted her red wrist, I should say, and she smiled. I mean, the one like this. Yes, the one like that. Hey, how you doing? This is the second day that I am recording this video. Yesterday, when it was a little bit darker out back and I had a different shirt on, today is Saturday. And so we're going to talk about Elisha and two she-bears. Now, after Elijah went to heaven, Elisha became God's messenger to the corrupt nation of Israel. Now, God gave Elisha a double spirit of his power. It was actually more power than Elijah had, and Elisha asked for it, and God gave it to him. He really needed God's power because he was going to go to the nation of Israel, to the tribes of the nation of Israel, and he was going to try and tell them to change their ways from being an idolatrous nation and come back to the true God. Now, this story is in 2nd chapter of 2 Kings, verses 23 and 24. And this is a true story. This really happened. I'm going to tell you. Now, regarding Elijah, today we're talking about Elisha, but regarding Elijah, if you really want to find out more about him, how he was taken to heaven, and Elisha became God's messenger, you need to go back and watch one of my last videos. That one is called, let me see here, Unknown Occurrences and God's Miracles. Okay, so Elisha starts towards Bethel, and it's one of the 2 idolatrous worship centers in northern kingdom of Israel. Many years before, the first Israelite king, Jeroboam, had set up golden calves at Dan and Bethel, both, and ordained a worship center for the people to worship these idols instead of the true God. And to the day of Elisha, they were still doing that. Jeroboam was the first king after the kingdom of Israel was divided from Israel to Israel and Judah. 2 kingdoms, 2 different kings now. Jeroboam being the first one of Israel. Even though there was a remnant in those places, most people were still worshiping idols. A little bit of a godly remnant, still worshiping God, but most people were still worshiping these calves and idols. So, as Elisha is making his way towards the city, the Bible records that there were a ton of little children that came out and began to shout to Elisha. They began to harass him. They began to bully him. Now, I want you to understand something about little children. What we're talking about is not like we think of little children in elementary school or little children, that we have in our homes. We're talking about children who are anywhere from the age of 10 to 12 to 19. So probably what we're talking about of little children, the Bible is not saying little children like we know, talking about young people. And they could be teenagers, and probably were teenagers up until 19. So probably these kids were told by their parents that they need to go and kick out Elisha as he came to the city. Make him leave. So what'd they do? I'll tell you what they did. They started yelling at him, and the things that started yelling at him were like, "Hey, bald man, get up, Baldy." And they surrounded him, I'm sure, and were telling him essentially, you need to go to heaven. You need to die, just like Elijah. Now, if you understand what we're saying here, they didn't understand the true God. They were from families that were, again, from idolatrous parents who were trying to get rid of Elisha. They didn't want him around. So the Bible tells us that he cursed them. Now, what does it mean to curse someone? Well, if you go back to the Hebrew, in this case especially, it means to swiftly afflict them. Swiftly afflict them. How? Well, this is what happened. He's not yet in the city yet. He's still probably in a wooded area or fields. And what happens is, all of a sudden, these she-bears came out of the woods. And they were growling, they were tearing up the ground, and they were going after these children. They're baring their teeth. You ever seen a bear bare its teeth? Wasn't meant to say it that way, but a bear will growl and saliva's coming out maybe, and he's angry. In this case, it was 2 she-bears that were angry. What did the she-bears do? They went after these kids and they ripped them up. Now, I don't know if you've ever seen a bear on YouTube rip up an animal or a person, but that's exactly what they did. And it tells us that were at least 42 of them were ripped and attacked and torn to shreds. So probably most of them died, if not all of them. And there could have been more than 42. We don't know. But we know that 42 were ripped up to shreds. The Bible isn't clear whether they all died or were killed, but we do know that God enacted this curse on these children. And if you've ever been close to a bear that's been in the woods and you came upon one, and you know the fear that you felt, and I'm sure that's what those kids felt. So I'm going to tell you what I believe this story is really telling us. Again, if you've been in the woods and you've heard growling, you've heard things that you couldn't explain, and especially if it was dark and you're in the woods, wow. Maybe you didn't see anything, but it was close. What would you do? You'd probably pray, right? Hey, help me, Lord. Very frightening. But God used these animals to protect Elisha, whose life was in danger. This story tells me something. I hope it tells you something too. That we need to be very careful about how we treat our elders. First of all. Second of all, and most importantly, we need to protect and respect those who have been called by God, whether it's our ministers, our deacons, people that represent God, who minister for God. Because in reality, if you dishonor them, you are dishonoring God. You're dishonoring God. Because God has called them to do very special work for Him. Now, I want to make sure that you hit that subscribe button and that like button, because you're going to see more miraculous, scary, mysterious, and frightening, but true stories from God's Word. And I've got some neat plans coming up very soon for some things that even are different than where we're sitting and where we're at. So tell everybody about it, okay? And let's have some great time together. And I'll see you next time when you got a minute.